I'm Ace Buchan. I'm a professional surfer from the Central Coast. Growing up on the Central Coast was a dream for a young kid that loved the ocean as much as I did and had this amazing playground to go and explore, to kind of have the chance to wake up and, watch the sunrise, pre-dawn light kind of turn into those beautiful blue and pink hues. Nature, in the way that it was kind of intended is really special. The beaches and the space that we have on the Central Coast has given me a lot of clarity, and it's kept me grounded. It's kept my keel upright when things have gone a little bit crazy in my life, and being able to glide along the face of a moving piece of ocean that's been generated hundreds of thousands of miles away, it's a feeling like no other. One of the things I really love about the Central Coast is that there are these beautiful kind of swathes of land that have been declared national parks, and as a child I was lucky enough to start experiencing that with my parents. To now go and do that with my kids is really special. Being able to kind of walk through the bush and not see anyone else and just kind of listen to the sounds and sometimes just drop the surfboards and go exploring, I feel pretty lucky to have access to. For tens of thousands of years, people have inhabited this land and looked after it and cared for it, and we need to respect this beautiful playground that we've been lucky enough to call home. It's something pretty special.
Well, good evening, everybody. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Darkinjung people on which we meet today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to the community members that have joined us via the webcast, and also those in the public gallery for the 22nd of March 2022 Central Coast Council Public Forum. I now declare this forum open, but this is our first forum under the new Code of Meeting Practice that we approved a meeting or two ago. And what we've done is we've put in a policy position where this forum is held prior to the council meeting. And it's designed to do that, in doing that, to enable myself to have some time to talk to the senior staff here about some of the comments that the members from the community put forward. Because I know you're all talking and want to talk about papers that are on the council meeting. It's very difficult to sort of, you talk, we look at the paper and have some input, if you like, from the professional staff. So the intention here is that you will each have your 3 minutes to speak. We'll then have a break for probably about a quarter of an hour, and then the actual public council meeting will actually commence then. And at that point in time, we will go through the agenda, and when it comes to the agenda item that you had an interest in, I will ask the senior staff person to respond to comments that have been made, and then we'll get on and make a decision around what we're going to do with the paper. So that is the change in the way we're now running things, but as I said, it's designed to actually get better input, and it's also designed to get better responses by giving that little bit of time in the middle where we can talk about what that response might look like. So with that, we're holding this today to hear from community members who have registered to speak, and I do ask that when people speak that the remainder keep quiet and let the person have their say without fear or favour. Also need to remind you that also for the public forum, we are webcasting it as well, and that you need to be mindful of the fact that anything you say may be used against you if you're inadvertently sort of perhaps defame somebody or something like that, so you need to be very careful about how you word things. I would also ask you to make sure your mobile phones are off and to remain seated. And of course, we still have to work within the confines of our COVID safety plan. Before we enter into that, I will just check with any of the staff. So for the public forum, I don't believe we've probably got any staff, or have we got any staff with a conflict? Not for the public. I think Boris, yes. Boris has got to declare one, and because of an association with the RIMBA, so he will be not present when that matter is being discussed, both in the forum and in the council meeting. I remind you all that you have only got 3 minutes to speak, and I'm strict on time because you need to make sure that you've got your key points across in that time frame. This is a meeting in front of the public, remember? It is not a public meeting, and therefore it's important that you get your points across in the time frame because everyone needs to have an equal and opportune time to be able to speak. So tonight we have 6 speakers. We have 3 on the Arimba Area Strategy and Centre Master Plan, item 2.7. We have 1 on item 2.8, and we have 2 on item 2.10, and we have 1 on 2.12, although I think we might have had 1 repeated twice there actually by the look of it on my run sheet. So with that, I'm going to ask Brian Davies if you could come to the microphone, and they'll switch it on for you. And I know you've been here before, so keep yourself fairly close to the microphone, and we can all hear. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Hart. We oppose this plan on behalf of the Arimba Region Residents Association. You kindly deferred the December 21 plan based on our concerns. We could be presenting the same talks tonight, so I sent them to you again earlier. Correct. There are 5 minor changes to the December version that make no real difference to the plan. Council claim they responded to our concerns and fixed it. We tell you they have not. All the reasons that informed your decision to defer at that time and more still remain. Why the sudden haste when next week's LEC case for the boarding house could scuttle the whole plan? Most points were brushed aside. Critically, Council refused to mention the motion limiting building heights, limited to 2 storeys. Every other plan mentioned 3, 4, 6, 8 storeys. Why the reluctance to mention 2? They mentioned 2 storeys in discussions, the agenda, the second attachment, but they refused to put it in the plan. None of these other things have any legal standing. Council say the plan is limited to 2 storeys by the LEP and DCP, which will not change, yet they've inserted more references to changing the LEP and DCP. So once again, I have to say, Mr Hart, you're voting on what the plan contains, not the periphery or what staff tell you. One image was edited to remove 4-storey buildings, but there are more examples of higher than 2 storeys in high density, as you can see in this first slide. And more in slide 2, which is somehow minus the boarding house site buildings. Words to reach greater heights were removed from one clause, but the term landmark buildings remains. This in itself means bulkier or higher, so the intent of the statement is unchanged. Removing provide incentives to doesn't change the intent when the rest of that clause and other sections list several incentives. The clause also has references to upper levels, plural. The plan is a wolf in sheep's clothing. It makes all the right noises about preserving Ourimbah's character, heritage, history, natural beauty with a mix of housing types and densities. Yet the details of the plan do anything but turning a village oasis into an urban desert, a heat island in a bushfire zone. Then they'll say lives are in danger, so we'll have to cut down the trees. It reminds me of a Joni Mitchell song. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Staff say you can choose to abandon the plan and leave Ourimbah to its fate. We've never suggested this. We've always aimed for a workable plan that aligns with reality. So I respectfully ask that you once again defer this plan so some meaningful consultation can lead to productive changes to make the plan match the key principles. We'll still say it can be fixed, just give us a chance. As a starting point, or I would like to invite Mr Hart and Dr Howe to visit Ourimbah and see the challenges that make this plan unworkable. Thank you.
Thank you. And the second speaker we have is Greg McKill. Right, your 3 minutes starts, just go.
Mr Hart, it is disappointing that both Brian and myself find it necessary to again make these presentations to you tonight, opposing this latest March 2022 iteration of the Ourimbah Master Plan and Land Use Strategy. We were optimistic that after our December meeting appearance, Council's strategic planning staff would properly consult with the Ourimbah community. Sadly, this has not been the case. A lengthy separate written submission that covers omissions and failures of consultation over the years was forwarded to you and other senior council staff late last week, as it is impossible to even scratch the surface here tonight in the 3 minutes allocated. By way of example, the image of Jake Street above and what is proposed needs further clarification and consultation, including with the university concerning the Nissan hut. In recent failures, given Council made major changes to the 2019 version, why wasn't it placed on exhibition again? Then after your deferral in December 2021, we were invited to a very brief meeting with Council to discuss the master plan on 1 March this year. We believed this was to discuss our concerns and was the first step in meaningful consultation. To our amazement, we were told that all community concerns had been addressed and that the plan was already finalised and going back for approval at tonight's meeting, and that we would see the changes when the agenda came out. The responses to our concerns from 2020 and 2021 do nothing to allay these concerns. Again, these are covered in a written submission. Brian discussed the ineffective changes, but I'll highlight one other particularly horrifying example, which is shown in slide 2, relating to fire and flood. We still have grave concerns about this, and there has never been a bushfire map in the plan. One response included in the plan states Precinct 3, in brackets Reservoir Road, adjoins the Ourimbah Centre to the west and is located less than 1 kilometre from the train station and is close to the Ourimbah Public School. This is one of the few precincts in Ourimbah that is relatively flood-free. The area is highly bushfire prone and sufficient evacuation routes would be required to support any substantial population growth. Presumably this states that we are saying for years about being no safe land for development. Other parts of the plan emphasise evacuation routes for flooding. So as council seem to be saying, if they provide exit routes, then most people will have a chance to escape, but they could be abandoning their homes to be destroyed by fire or flood. I respectfully ask that you again defer this matter, and so this latest version can be exhibited and effective consultation can take place to get a safe and realistic plan finalised. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have Robert Todd.
Okay.
Far away.
Good evening, Mr. Hart and council officers. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. My name is Robert Todd. I was a stakeholder within the 22 members of the meeting held by council about Ourimbah some years ago. I do have an interest in a large piece of land within walking distance, 10 to 15 minutes to the Ourimbah railway station and adjacent to the university entrance. The property is street number 14 Chittaway Road, or sometimes known as Enterprise Drive. I've had a number of meetings and correspondence with council over the past 35 years in relation to this property. Ourimbah's close freeways, Sydney, Newcastle, other destinations. There's many facilities, universities, shopping centres, railway, sport playing fields, a number of large businesses within 10-minute drive, and also Ourimbah's close to the Brisbane Water Bay and a short drive to the beaches at Shelley Beach. Council's put a lot of work into this over the years, and they should be thanked for all of the effort that's been made. Vacant land, as we know, is the major cost in the building of a new home, and at present, getting out of the reach for many people who would like to have their own home. Many people are turning to purchasing unit-type homes. Now, I just want to speak about Precinct 8, the eastern side of Ourimbah, and along Enterprise Drive, or Chittaway Road as it's known by two names in the area, and has land on the southern end that can be developed into mixed housing to suit all people and their needs. That can be units, single houses, townhouses, many types of living of mixed buildings, which is an accommodation for the university. It's going to grow in the future, there's no doubt about that. The eastern side can play a major part in the future of Ourimbah, as there is a great need for buildings so people can live in, and most important, at a cost they can afford. There may also be some new commercial facilities for those residents. I support the plan today, but I would ask that if anyone has land resumed, this is an important thing I believe, for any means in the town centre or anywhere in this plan, that fair compensation shall be given. No one should be worse off financially. It's time to move ahead in Ourimbah. This matter's been going on for a long time, and once approved, Ourimbah will start to have a great future. There will be a number of people, including myself and other people and council, having talks with council and other plans, although it's going to take a long time, but it's time to bite the bullet and let's go forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we have Stephanie. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. I'm speaking today as a town planner who's working for approximately 10 developers in the Wadawba urban release area.
You don't want a job, do you?
I have seen your ads, 5 of which are directly impacted by the proposed zone change. I also work for ADW Johnson, who were instrumental in the original rezoning of the Wadawba area. I object to the amendment to the LEP, both in its entirety and as a change under Section 322 of the Act, which is generally reserved for minor matters and is afforded an expedited assessment. The area of land proposed to be rezoned from residential to conservation equates to approximately 3,500 square metres, which has an undeveloped value of $500,000 and a developed value of significantly more. It also represents a direct loss of approximately 8 lots. For this reason, I don't feel that the amendment can be considered minor, as it backzones valuable land and therefore needs to go through the full LEP amendment process. I'm not an ecologist, so I won't go into detail with regards to the width required, which is based around the squirrel glider, except to say that expert advice was provided at the original rezoning that confirmed that a 40-metre corridor could be provided without the need to increase the conservation zoning. This is particularly so noting that the DCP clearly shows a 40-metre width as being required under the structure plan. Finally, and most importantly, Council and the development industry are currently grappling with how to deal with the avoid and minimise test as stipulated under the Biodiversity Conservation Act. Recent case law suggests that developers who only avoid developing within the conservation zone lands have not adequately addressed the avoid and minimise test. Case law suggests that additional residential zone land also needs to be avoided. If Council keep the current 30-metre zoning under the LEP, but enforce the 40-metre DCP corridor, proponents will have an opportunity to use that additional 10 metres of retained land as their avoid and minimise argument. They are also able to apply the additional 10 metres in a flexible manner. At the moment, it's arbitrarily been put at 5 metres either side of the current corridor, and this doesn't take into consideration the actual ecological site constraints. By being able to adopt that additional 10 metres in a flexible manner, you'll be able to get better biodiversity outcomes for that corridor. So in closing, the required 40-metre corridor can be provided without the need to rezone the land, and by leaving the current zone boundaries and relying on the DCP control, it is likely to result in a more targeted corridor containing higher value ecological attributes. I would ask that tonight's item be deferred, and I would be happy to meet with Council's strategic staff to go through the matter in more detail, having worked on the project for over 10 years.
Thank you. And now we have Barton Lawler.
Good afternoon, Mr Administrator and Council staff. I wish to speak briefly in support of Planning Proposal RZ 38/2013 for certain land at Glenworth Valley and Calga, for the purpose of correcting a minor error that exists within the report on tonight's agenda, please. Whilst the Council report on the planning proposal is very well written, it does contain a slight error that has only recently come to light that I would like to please ask Council to correct before the planning proposal report is determined tonight. The background to this request is that prior to seeking government agency feedback on the planning proposal, Council resolved on a number of occasions to include a number of allotments, including all of lots 23 and 108 in DP 755221. However, as a result of the government agency feedback process, the Biodiversity and Conservation Division of National Parks and Wildlife made a comment requesting that those parts of lots 23 and 108 that were affected by an offset agreement be excluded from the planning proposal. Unfortunately, this request by the government agency was incorrect in that the offset agreement they referred to was never finalised, was abandoned 5+ years ago, and now will no longer be occurring. This request unfortunately resulted in the proposed additional permitted uses map being amended to exclude certain parts of lots 23 and 108 from the planning proposal. To correct this error, the applicant requests that the additional permitted uses map, as shown on page 620 of the business paper attachments, be amended to include the entirety of lots 23 and 108 as was exhibited and originally resolved by Council. Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally, we have John Harkness.
Thank you very much. I'm here tonight to represent Surf Life Saving Central Coast and its 8,300 members, volunteer members here on the coast, and it's in support of item 2.12. And it's Surf Life Saving Central Coast and the Central Coast Council probably enjoy the best practice operations for lifeguarding and life-saving services on the east coast of Australia. Our 15 patrolled beaches from the lakes in the north to Yamina in the south are patrolled during the week by council lifeguards and on the weekends and public holidays by volunteers. Last year, the visitors to the Central Coast on our beaches on our weekends when we patrol were increased by some 34%, and no doubt the similar stats would be relevant for the council lifeguards. So it's a testament to both organisations about the operations of what they do. The working relationship between Central Coast Council and Surf Life Saving Central Coast is, as I said, possibly the best practice, and great collaboration between the organisations and teams with common goals and objectives. The joint share of equipment that we operate and the alignment of services make sense for efficiencies, financial benefit and storage constraints. Both organisations take pride in the maintenance and provision of equipment. The value of the volunteer hour equates to in excess of $4 million based on our patrolling hours last year, and in excess of 97,000 hours annually, so providing substantial value to the community which both organisations serve. As I said, this partnership is viewed by other councils and life-saving branches with envy, as it's one where both organisations can leverage each other's strengths to provide the safest possible beach services to the community we serve. And for this, we're grateful for the ongoing commitment of Central Coast Council under its long-standing arrangements. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, that brings to a close the public forum for tonight. So we will take a short break now, and then we'll reconvene at 6:30 with the formal council meeting. Thank you.
strategic plan is the community's vision for the Central Coast for the next 10 years. It's called One Central Coast because this is the first plan for the whole of the Central Coast. We are one region, one council and one community. We live in a special place here on the coast, one in which we want all members of our community to feel valued and have access to a range of opportunities to participate in the richness of community life. And every one of us can play a part in bringing this community vision to life.
If people feel part of a community in some way, they'll give without probably even knowing they're doing it.
I wanted to restore this building and get it back to what it was. It was the jewel of the crown, and I wanted to get it back to that. Making a difference. I guess that's what we're really here for.
The smile on the faces when they see these engines and that bus coming around, they just love it.
If you're following what makes you happy and excited and interested, then you're definitely going to live a life that you will be thankful to have lived.
At the end of the day, we just had a good idea. We needed the support of many people to turn that great idea into a sustainable venture. My name's Tim Silverwood. I grew up on the Central Coast. It wasn't until I got a bit older and started travelling around the world I realised that what we had was so special because people don't always treat the environment as well as we do here on the Central Coast. Our programs have focused on going into schools and running events in communities. We also have a huge global online audience. One man cannot solve these big global problems. It's going to take a tribe of people coming together to solve them. It's a really amazing and rewarding journey in spreading this message around the world.
I've always been on the coast and I've loved the coast. About 6 years ago I bought the Chapman building. I got the opportunity, I saw that it was for sale and I stood back on the car park up there and a village central and I looked down and I could just feel this was the place to be. I could just see what the town was. There's always these little niches that are going back and forth and I guess it's an obsession for all of us because we saw what Wyong was like and it's getting it to a place where we're proud to say we're from Wyong. Like it's become a real proud place to be.
My name's Chris Wallace. Myself and my wife, we own Community Fire Education and the Fun Engine. We educate the community in a different way. We teach people what to do in case of fire. One of the biggest things is our education bus. What we do, we go out to different fates, festivals, wherever we can go. When we do the bus sometimes, we get 2,000 through that bus. I just enjoy communicating and getting out there and just educating in a different way.
I'm Meredith Gilmore. I've lived on the coast since 2000, originally from Sydney. Chose the coast because it's close to Sydney, but it's got that more laid back kind of thing that I like. I like living in regional areas. I started visual art in my 40s. It's just so different from what I ever thought that I'd ever do, and it is what led me into thinking it would be great to talk to people in the arts on the radio. So I started doing some shows, particularly a program called Coast Arts, which was a new show, and I reached out into the community because I'm an artist as well. And I just felt like there was a lot of scope on the radio to do interviews with artists and poets and writers, and that's been going now for over 7 years.
My name is Shauna O'Brien. I am from the Central Coast of New South Wales on Dark and Young land, and I'm a dancer. As an Indigenous dancer, we're very inspired by the environment and where we come from, all of the trees, the way that they curve around all of the rocks and the sea faces, the beautiful water, the fresh air, and that plays a huge part in the creative process. I was lucky enough to study at NASA Dance College, which was a super incredible experience, and the facilities, the studios are really beautiful, the staff are incredible, and I feel very privileged to have had that opportunity. Through volunteering, I was able to meet a bunch of really great other young people in the community that are really passionate about helping other people, and that's a way of taking something that I'm very passionate about and sharing that with other people. No matter where I go to work or if I have to spend a lot of time in Sydney, I always come back to the Central Coast because it feels like home and it helps rejuvenate me.
One of the things about the Central Coast I've noticed as well, which is people are so helpful to each other. They collaborate. They are interested in going to each other's exhibitions, not just to see what people are doing, but so that there are people there. And you've got to be competitive, but you don't have to always be competitive with each other.
If you're in a position to make a difference, I guess you're obliged to make that difference, really. Just happy to, give it all I could, and it became, a local icon and a bustling place to be.
All right, well, welcome back again. Again, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respect to elders both past, present and emerging. So, welcome to the formal 22nd of March 2022 Central Coast Council Ordinary Meeting. And I now declare that meeting open. Again, I remind anybody that it is being webcast and please keep your phones off. as has become a little bit traditional, I have a few comments that I just want to sort of make before we get underway. And I guess it would be remiss of me not to mention the public inquiry. So on the 17th of March, the Minister for Local Government did release the Commissioner's report following the public inquiry into Central Coast Council's financial crisis. I have to say I welcome the report, and I certainly support the 8 recommendations that the Commissioner has made. One of those recommendations was to immediately terminate the councillors. But I must say, since then, and since the report has come out, I have continued to be disappointed somewhat that some former councils do not appear to yet be taking responsibility for their inactions and behaviour in the chamber, and some making comments that there was never an opportunity to take action. On Saturday, the 13th of June 2020, when the council workshop, which was mentioned in the inquiry, it was conducted on the operational plan for the year 2021, where the facilitator did make it very clear. Now, I happened to run into the facilitator late last year, and I happened to have come across him a number of times, and he's also highly experienced in running local government. I actually asked him about that particular meeting and what was his take from it. He laughed. He said he had never been in all his years, and he must be in the vicinity of 10 to 15 years, but he said in all his years he's never come across a group of people who were unable to make a decision. So on that day, he told the story to me that at lunchtime he asked the financial staff when was the financial crisis going to actually hit in terms of timing. And bear in mind, also present at this meeting was another set of consultants who were advising the council, Grant Thornton et al., who were advising the council that they were also going to run out of money. So at lunchtime, the facilitator asked the finance staff when are they actually going to run out. He got the reply sometime September, October of that year, 2020. He came back after lunch and he said to the councillors, we're in a plane flying along 30,000 feet and we're about to run out of fuel. The fuel's going to run out in October, November. Councillors, what are we going to do about it? His words, not mine. The councillors could not agree on cutting anything from the budget. Generally, they acted for their ward and they said, I'm not giving up anything in my area. And I think the Commissioner who oversaw the public hearings got that absolutely right. The councillors could not work together and come to an agreement, despite the fact that they were being told on the 13th of June 2020, at that workshop facilitated, they were told there wasn't enough money by Grant Thornton and they still couldn't come to any conclusion by the end of that day. And the facilitator just has never come across anything to that extent in his entire time in consulting. So I just put that out as an anecdotal bit of evidence. I just want to remind, when we do get back to democracy, that councillors do have 2 roles. They, 1, represent their community, and 2, they are there to govern the organisation on behalf of the community. It is in the governance role that they failed to acknowledge, and they fell well short in their fiscal responsibility. And our community deserves much better than that. That financial crisis has left our community and council staff feeling very let down and very angered. The Central Coast community called for the public inquiry following the financial crisis. And whilst those findings may not satisfy everybody, and that does include me, this is an opportunity to move forward. Focus on the future and the rebuilding of this council to deliver for our community. It is very definitely time to draw a line in the sand, accept what happened, and move on. I do favour democracy returning sooner than later. I've already made that statement. But until such time that occurs, I will continue to support the CEO and the team in actioning the business recovery plan and the strategies that have been put in place for the council to become financially sustainable into the future. On another matter, over the last 3 weeks, and unfortunately it would appear to be in the 3 or 4 days to come, Central Coast has been threatened by severe weather events. Storm, heavy rainfall and unpredictable weather has hit the region, and we've had floods, road closures, landslips, debris in our waterways, closure of beaches and evacuations. Now, Council this time has learnt a lot from the previous years, and they formed an incident management team led very ably by Boris Bolgoff down the end there. So they actually took actions in advance of the impacts being realised so that we could mitigate some of the potential impacts to the community as much as possible. We worked very much alongside the various government agencies, and we kept the politicians locally informed on a daily basis. Very pleased to see also that New South Wales Government has announced the Central Coast has been included in the Natural Disaster Declaration, which was promoted through council communication channels. Now that is important because it does mean the residents and agencies in our community can receive funding, and that also includes the council. Now, as we move to the recovery phase, we also have a recovery committee that has been set up, and that recovery committee working alongside Resilience New South Wales to provide information and assistance to the community. Resilience New South Wales is the lead agency. Once again, we are a support agency to them. Now, I have to be, and as were the state politicians and federal politicians, very impressed this time round with the strength and the responsiveness of the council staff in this emergency situation. And it was not largely, I think in fact, to the fact that they minimised the impact of the event by getting on the front foot, clearing drains, widening the entrance and doing other associated benefits. We've set up pop-up recovery hubs on the 14th of March at the Spencer Community Hall, and I have visited out to the community there, and I've agreed that we should try and improve the hall there and make it a better centre to evacuate people to, and that may include better comms and better power generation. Our community is encouraged to continue to report road issues to Council through the customer service phone line and to submit online reports. But I really do want to thank Council staff, particularly those who are on the front line, and that incident management team who worked day and night to make sure the comms was out there and that our teams were out there working 24/7. So it's a big shout out to those teams from Council and the senior staff who were managing that. Now, just briefly, IPART's draft pricing determination from water and sewer was released on the 15th of March, and this is a reasonable result for Council. It's not exactly what we asked for, but it does give us sufficient money to enable both water, sewer and drainage to stand on their own 2 feet and not require subsidy from the general rate side. What I've done here is put together a table which shows what the rate impact will look like if we put into place the current draft determination that water and sewer that IPART has provided for water and sewer. So if I put that draft determination in, the impact on an average house or rateable property in the Central Coast, and you put the current rate, your general rate, in there, which bear in mind we're asking to be continued for the next 7 years. But if I put those 2 numbers in there, you will see under the line Central Coast 22-23, so that includes all of our new proposed costing. I'm comparing that to this year's costings for the average property for Lake Mac and Newcastle. You can see that we're approximately $200 plus cheaper in those combined rates for Central Coast residents. And I have to say, having now been here for 16, 17 months, the complexity of the Central Coast greatly outweighs the complexity of Newcastle or even Lake Mac. So I think it's important we keep things in context. When people talk about massive rate increases and so on, that is the impact. It is $200 for the average property less than Lake Mac and Newcastle. And finally, I want to say thank you to Mr. Brian Bell and Mr. David Milliken, both who are attending their last council meeting in these current roles. They both, by the time the next council meeting is held, they will be going back to, well, David will be going back to his substantial position, and I could probably say Brian's going back to his substantial position, which is retirement. And so I have to say I wish you well, Brian, on about your second or third retirement. You're a bit like me. Can't quite get there, but one day you will. I think you may have made it this time round. And David Milliken, thank you for your efforts. You've stepped into a very difficult role and you've managed it superbly over the past 3 months or so. So thank you very much to both of you for your achievements here. With that, we'll move on to item 1.1, which is disclosures of interest. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. I believe we don't have any other, apart from perhaps Mr. Goldwath, if you may wish to declare.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Administrator. I just want to declare a less than significant non-pecuniary interest in relation to item 2.7, the Ourimbah Area Strategy and Centre Master Plan. I have property in that precinct, but it's not in an investigation area. That's why I'll be able to stay in the chambers. I obviously don't have the ability to vote, or I won't be participating in discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's also why Mr. Volgoff stayed for the previous thing when I said he was going, so that was a small mistake on my part. So with that, I'm going to resolve the recommendation that is shown on the screen. Item 1.2, which is confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. I've read the minutes. I believe them to be a true and accurate record, and so I will now move and confirm those minutes by the resolution that is shown on the screen. Item 1.3, which is notice of intention to deal with matters in closed session. The item is the refinancing of borrowings. I don't intend to go into a confidential session. I've been through the report and I will talk about that when it comes up on the agenda. So it will be the last item on the agenda, 3.1, and you will see the resolutions, but the report in detail won't be presented. Now, because of the interest in the chamber, I'm going to put a procedural motion forward. I would like to move item 2.7 to the front of the agenda and consider that item now, if I can, because we have a number of interested people here. So rather than having to stay around and hang around, we'll talk to it now and do it from there. So with that, I shall bring that item forward, which is the adoption of the Ourimbah Area Strategy and Centre Master Plan. Now, there were some speakers against that, 3 speakers. I've had the opportunity to talk to staff over the period, and of course I had read, and thank you for your written submissions. I have to say it makes it just so much easier when they're written submissions, and I can obviously talk to staff and get, both views, if you like. So I'm going to ask, firstly, Mr. Milliken, and I have to say Mr. Milliken is in isolation. He's unfortunately a very close contact of a COVID suffering person. So fortunately he stayed away, but as you can see, he is present, and I will ask him to respond to that paper and to the comments that were raised. Mr. Milliken.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator, and thank you to the speakers who came along earlier and spoke to the council. I think to start with, it's important to understand that this is a strategic document. We're not proposing any changes to the LEP or the DCP as a result of adopting this tonight, if that was to be the outcome. It's a strategic direction for the Ourimbah Town Centre, which will guide future changes as Ourimbah develops. So there are some slides up on the screen. The first slide, well, the next slide, please, the background and timeline, which the speakers did touch on, and we touched on last time this item came to council. This is the fourth time the plan has been considered by the council. And in the last time in late 2021, the item was deferred to allow us to speak with the Ourimbah Residents Association and to make further refinements to the plan. In the period between then and now, we have met with them and we have made some changes to the plan as a result. And throughout I guess the period of working on this strategy, where we started off with more of a higher growth scenario, we have moved through to what we will call the low growth scenario. So those comments were taken on board earlier on in the development of this plan. And we've also removed the built form section of the master plan, which had building height diagrams and talked around 3 to 4 story development. That was in a previous version of the plan. In this version of the plan, we've taken some of the feedback on board. We have removed the pictures and images that talked around 3 to 4 story development, including the Jack Street public domain diagram. And we've also removed some words and sentences that may be indicative of that increased building height. So we're really trying to take on board the comments from the community around building height. I think one of the speakers said there are around 5 changes we've made coming out of the last meeting we had with the Residents Association. So there's a couple of examples there. In terms of building height, and I guess this is one of the key issues, is that we have brought it all the way down from what we had in the high growth scenario down to a stage where we're not talking around building heights in the plan anymore. The reason for that is the building heights are controlled within the DCP, and the DCP talks around a 2-story height limit. Now, the DCP being a policy, if we brought in a strategy that had a hard limit at 2 stories, we'd actually be reducing the development potential that is there at the moment, and that would have consequent impacts on council's side. So look, the lowest we can go with the height limit is to refer back to the DCP, which is what the plan intends to do. And we don't intend to put height limits into the strategy, because we're not proposing any changes or any strategic direction in that space. So that's just, I guess, responding to some of the comments that were made by the members of the community a bit earlier. We just move on to the next slide. We touched on these at the last time this item came to council. These are really the strategic directions that the Ourimbah plan tries to achieve, and it's really around coordinating development and making sure that as Ourimbah grows, it's done so in a planned and orderly fashion. The next slide, slide number 4, Keystone Principles. That talks around what some of the important elements of the plan or important considerations of the plan were. So really around protecting Ourimbah's natural scenery and its heritage setting, whilst at the same time allowing for growth in housing choice, allowing some growth in the economic side of the town, and encouraging more sustainable forms of transport. The next slide just talks around the precinct plans, which is the precincts that we divided the Ourimbah area into. Precinct, the grey precinct in the middle is the town centre precinct, and that has a particular town centre master plan associated with it. The rest of the area are precincts within the area master plan. So as I said, the next slide number 6, is the centre master plan. And that really talks around how we're going to coordinate development in the town centre of Ourimbah, and what some of those important elements are to achieve the longer term outcomes that we are after in Ourimbah. So some examples there are, rationalising the parking, responding to the heritage and bushland setting, and improving the urban structure within Ourimbah. And the final slide is on implementation. And this is sort of where the strategy, where we will go after the strategy, and really there's actions that we will take over the 10-year period that we will review regularly to achieve the outcomes we are after in November. And I think finally it's just important to note that we need to, as a community, get an understanding on the balance between greenfield and infill development. This is a site where it's a town centre close to a railway station and ticks a lot of boxes for some modest level of infill development. We need to balance that against with the input of the community and knowing that if development that doesn't happen in town centres happens in greenfield and your ecological sites. So we need to get that balance right, and I think this plan really strikes that balance, and we have worked with the community over a number of years to get a plan that I think strikes that balance. So thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Milligan, I note that through this we talk about it's consistent with the Central Coast Regional Plan. If we didn't do anything here, is it likely the state could actually start to, given the proximity to rail lines and all the other things and the M1, is it likely the state might just do their own thing with it if we don't do something?
Whether it's likely or not, I'm not sure. But as I said, Ourimbah ticks a lot of those boxes for infill development, being close to a railway station, close to a motorway, a good, robust urban structure. So I guess it could be considered a good candidate for the state government to intervene should they wish. And I think that's why it's a good idea for us to have a good strategy for Ourimbah that is well thought through and has been developed together with the community, so that if and when other parties come along, we can say, well, no, we have a strategy in place, and that is the strategy for Ourimbah.
Thank you. Look, this has been a very long and drawn out subject for discussion, going, I think, way back to the 2016. I think your first slide showed that some of the early stuff was done. And there's been a number of iterations, and it seems to have gone from quite high development to what I understand to be relatively low. And I guess I'm greatly heartened by the fact that the DCP remains at 2 stories, and that will keep and limit the size of the buildings there. It's also, I think we have to, as Mr. Todd pointed out, it is really close to the rail lines. It's really close to these other areas. The state is very keen with their connected 15-minute sort of neighbourhoods and so on. So this fits right into that whole mix of working within that area. So I have to say that looking at it, I know that the last time it came up here, I deferred it because I felt that there hadn't been a chance for the community group to meet with the staff. That meeting has occurred. I think there were some changes, and I know you may feel that they haven't, but when you look at the history of this and it's gone on for some considerable time, then it is something that needs to be drawn to a conclusion. So I do propose to add a 5th recommendation after talking with the staff over the thing, which is to just say that figure 5.2.1 of the strategy and centre master plan be amended to reflect current development footprints, which just add a bit of clarification. So with that, I am going to move this report and move those recommendations and adopt those as a decision of council. Thank you. We will now return to the agenda, and we will consider item 2.1, which is the presentation of the 2020-2021 financial reports and the related auditor reports for the Central Coast Council and Central Coast Water Supply Authority. And I'm going to ask CEO, Mr. Farmer, to talk to that.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This first item on the agenda is the final audited statements for the 2021 year. So this is some time ago. That's the year that ended 30th of June last year, 2021. It is, I guess, the culmination and the end, I guess, of of the Central Coast Council financial crisis. And that year showed and the audited statements for that year shows a $70.7 million deficit, which indeed goes in on top of the $89 million deficit for the previous year. We see $612 million in expenses and $542 million in income. The statements also show $7.96 $7.9 billion in assets and $584 million in liabilities, giving you net assets of Central Coast Council of $7.4 billion, and that makes us in the top half dozen local authorities in Australia in terms of both turnover and assets. So, you know, a substantial business on a national level. What is relevant is that we do not meet the Office of Local Government benchmarks on the operating performance ratio, or for that year we didn't, the debt service ratio, and our rates outstanding percentage. Further relevant piece in that is that the water and sewer business, as you mentioned, we've received a draft determination from IPART that shows some increases, potential increases in a draft determination. The water and sewer business lost $41.47 million during that period. There is, and it's unfortunate, a qualification on the infrastructure asset values in the statements, and that's due to the fact that an external revaluation was carried out on Council's technical asset register rather than on its financial asset register. That means there was a very minor non-consistency due to certain assets being displayed in slightly different forms in either register. Our sampling to date shows about a 3% non-consistency. Can I make clear that this relates to non-saleable fixed infrastructure assets, and it does not impact the cash or council status as a going concern. We've got a plan to reconcile these registers in time for the audit for the current financial year, and we're certainly very confident, or I'm very confident, in that we will have a fully reconciled technical and financial asset register for the audit for the current year. I think also we should just be really clear, there is an issue in the report that it talks about ARIC recommending the adoption of the reports. The timing of the signing off the reports with the Audit Office was such that the Audit and Risk Improvement Committee noted rather than recommended the statements to Council, in as much as they had already been signed off before they had an opportunity to consider it, due to the very, very late decisions relating to finalisation of them between the New South Wales Audit Office and Council.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Well, whilst it is still a large loss in terms of $70-odd million before capital is taken into consideration, so it's a trading loss, if you like, of $70-odd million. And bear in mind, the year we're talking about is the year 2021, and that commenced on the 1st of July 2020. The restructure, if you like, and the change didn't start to take place until the previous administrator, Dick Person, and myself arrived at the beginning of November, and also Ms. Carley arrived just a few days prior to that. So the restructure really didn't start till then. So a lot of what you see in this report unfortunately picks up that period of time when things weren't being addressed and being looked at. And for example, in that 70 million, I think I'm right, it's approximately 30-odd million of that would be restructuring costs, paying out staff, etc., etc. So if you like, if you took that out, inverted commas, our real loss is effectively only about 40 million if you took out the payments we had to make to staff over that financial year. So given all of that, and again, part of the qualification and so on is again partly because there was a use of, at that point of time, a continued unlawful use of restricted funds. So of course that also alienates the New South Wales Audit Office as well. So that financial year we've just reported does cover, unfortunately, still a period of that time. Now, I have to say I share the CEO's optimism that we will be on top of all of this by the time we come to closing off this financial year, which will be the 30th of June this year, and I fully expect to see a trading surplus for that period, which will be a massive turnaround from these previous successive losses. And it again is something, again, that was not really covered that well in recent times, but the fact is that it was the over expenditure on capital and other things that also greatly contributed to the financial loss and the use of unlawful use of extra funds. So the losses and the extra spending did the damage. So with that, I'm going to add, I think there's the fourth recommendation at the bottom there, is it not? Just scroll up. Yes, so that picks up the fact that there was just a slight correction required. So with that, I'm going to pass the recommendations that are shown on the screen and just make those as a decision of council. So we'll now move to item 2.2, which is the investment report for February, and I'll ask the CFO to talk to that. And again, I have to say, this is looking so promising.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Yes, I agree. If we get the presentation, yep, thank you. On the next slide, it is very clear that Council has actually improved its total cash position by $45 million. The main reasons for that is due to the receipt of the quarterly rates instalment payments, which were received at the end of February, a receipt of the quarterly financial assistance grant of $3.5 million, and the property settlement proceeds, which are going to be discussed in a further report. If we go to the next, thank you. The unrestricted funds balance shows negative unrestricted funds for water and drainage, consistent with the performance in the track record of previous months, and again consistent with I guess the track record of this calendar year. Once again, the general funds, unrestricted funds, has got more than sufficient cash sitting at $100 million to be able to cover the $45 million in unrestricted fund deficits across water fund and drainage fund. And if we go to the next slide, in terms of the portfolio return on investment, our weighted running yield for February is 0.86, which compares to the rolling 3-year benchmark bank bill swap rate of 0.42, and therefore I'm satisfied that we are performing better than the benchmark. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Ms. Cowley. Indeed, it's great to see that our cash position is building, and whilst that will fluctuate from time to time because, as Ms. Cowley mentioned, we had this time a big influx of rating income, so we tend to get these things in buckets when we send out the bills. So, of course, that will make those numbers go up and down. But nonetheless, it's an amazingly different position to 12 months ago when we were heavily into negative territory. So with that, I'm very happy to pass the recommendations, particularly in noting number 3, that we are allocating the unrestricted funds available in the general fund to meet the deficit that is showing in both water and drainage. So with that note, I resolve to move those recommendations and adopt them as a decision of council. Brings us to item 2.3, which is the monthly finance report. And you get to report all the good news, don't you?
Yeah. Ms. Cowley gets to report the cash.
We're sharing it about.
Yeah. The monthly financials, I guess, is consistent and should be consistent with the numbers we see in terms of cash. Obviously, P&L is slightly different, but should move in similar ways. And these financials for this month are a little unusual in that we've recognised a $21.4 million profit on disposal of land. That is the value of the land that we sold that is in excess of book value. And that improves council's financials significantly, but it's only a one-off. So when I'm going to discuss trends and performance, I'll generally discount by that amount. With the asset sale income included, council is $25.8 million better than budget for the month, or actually $4.3 million better for the month, discounting the sale. Importantly, shows that we are performing $20.8 million better than budget at this point in time for the year to date. Typically, council ramps up expenditure in the final quarter, so we anticipate that this may come back a little. However, it's anticipated that we will perform better than budget, than the current operating budget. As I mentioned in the previous, my previous presentation, council presented an audited financial statement showing a $70.7 million loss for the previous financial year. And if we compare the result to the same time at last year, it shows that council has improved its financial performance by $62.7 million for the first 8 months of the year compared to last year. And that's approximately 15% on turnover improvement on the bottom line. I would say it's reasonable to say that it is the most significant turnaround in Australian local government history, both in the percentage of change, but also in the quantum, given the size of this organisation. The report also shows that our capital works progress is a little slower than anticipated, largely due to supply issues related to the COVID situation and international supply chains, and it's recommended the budget be adjusted downwards by $1.2 million.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. As you've heard, basically an excellent report. I might add, we actually had a conversation which I have to say was infinitely more pleasant than one of the last conversations I was involved in with the bank the day that gave us the $100 million loan. So Ms. Cowley, Mr. Farmer and myself met with that team yesterday, and we were able to kind of look back at the dramas we actually had to go through, and they had to go through, because there was no laid down misere. And bear in mind, the team we deal with now is the relationship team or the lending team. It is not their risk team. Their risk team got involved, and that's who we had to deal with, and that's who our counterparts at this bank also had to deal with. But listening to them tell the story of how difficult they found it, it made, I think at the time, Ms. Cowley and I feel that maybe our problems hadn't been quite as big as all that, because their problems were pretty big as well. So it's interesting, in my mind, that will stand out probably for the rest of my life as a major milestone. But it's also, in that bank, it was a life-changing moment for some of those people as well. No one had ever contemplated that a very large entity like us would actually go broke. And the amount of change that we had to do, as the CEO has mentioned, was substantial. And the bank congratulated us yesterday on actually achieving something that people in the private sector would have struggled to do. So I just need to point that out, that it is possible to do it when there's a will and a desire and you're prepared to make the hard and tough decisions. So I would certainly urge councillors who may be involved in the future to actually think about that. You do have to make tough decisions. You do have to make hard decisions at a time, and it is very important that you do it in a timely manner before what's happening turns south at a rate that you lose control of. So that was, with that, I'm very happy to move the recommendations and pass those as a decision of council. So we'll now move on to item 2.4, which is an update on the asset sales program. We had As you know, we have been reporting those assets. Previously, we have reported assets to the sales to the value of 34.7 million. We have two more to add to that. One being the Oasis building just round the corner here, who we've actually sold to the Salvation Army, who were keen to take it, and they've obviously own around it. So it made good sense to go into a direct negotiation with them on the basis that we achieved the valuation. So we've achieved the valuation, and that sale has now been settled. And the other one was the Warnervale Town Centre land, where we actually got an agreed sale higher than the valuation, and that's part of the sort of thing that Mr. Farmer mentioned. When it's higher than our book value in the assets, then we have to show that as part of our income for that year only. So that's one of the examples that goes towards contributing to that extra money that we got in from the difference between our book value and the sale value. So with those two, we can add another 20 odd million to that, and we now have a total of some $54.7 million worth of asset sales. And we're very confident there was some other, I'll call them rats and mice, but there's some other small sales that will go through to complete the 60 million. And on top of that, we will still have the Gosford building, which hopefully will have an MOU not too far away. And with that, we're expecting in the order of close to 90 odd million dollars of sales, which will obviously go towards repatriating monies and repaying some debt if there's some left over from the repatriation. So with that, I shall move the recommendations and pass those recommendations as shown on the screen. We've now moved to item 2.5, which is senior staff roles, and I'll now ask the CEO to explain what he's trying to do there.
Thank you, Administrator. The Local Government Act allows for certain roles that have a certain level of seniority in the organisation and control to be considered senior staff roles. That gives the ability for those roles to be withdrawn from traditional award employment and be placed on a performance-based fixed-term contract. These roles that we've identified are vacant roles, and we're seeking to fill them via those contracted roles. It's reasonably consistent in the industry for large councils to have roles at this level classified as senior staff and employed under contract. So we're just seeking to move in that direction. There is some debate about what the future might be in terms of performance-based contract or employment terms for staff at this level might be, and we'll be engaged with the industry going forward, and if that changes, we will change, but at the moment that's the legislative framework, and I'm very keen to ensure that the employment terms are appropriate for the level of remuneration and the, I guess, the contribution and influence that people of that role have in our organisation is fit for purpose, and the most fit for purpose employment terms for people at that level in our organisation that are currently available is under the Office of Local Government Senior Staff Contract.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. So I can just confirm there's no new positions here at all. This is just replacing old positions with a, if you like, a better structured contractual management.
Yes, rather than being award employees, they become contract employees. So exactly the same number of positions, exactly the same number of staff.
And so no extra cost at all? No. Look, I fully support the CEO's move towards this. What it does mean, is, of course, is that the staff, when they're being employed more like the private sector, they can be put on a performance contract, so if they don't deliver, then they can disappear. So it is a much more rigorous process, and it also does allow for refreshment of levels of people without having to go through the whole box and dice that you do when you're under the award. So I certainly fully support this move, and with that I'm happy to move the recommendations that are shown on the screen and make those as a decision of council. We move to item 2.6, which is a request to amend the SEP, Gosford City Centre, to reclassify 7375 Man Street, Gosford, I believe, Mr. Milliken, you have a short presentation to open this one.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Administrator. So if we move, move to the first slide, which shows the site and the locality of what this agenda item is talking about. So this is a reclassification within the Gosford SEP of this property at 73 to 75 Man Street, Gosford, to enable it to be reclassified from community land to operational land, and therefore facilitate the sale of the site. Councils aren't permitted to sell land that is classified as community land without going through this process beforehand as part of that. Normally we'd be amending the LEP, but as Gosford is subject to the state government's Gosford SEP, State Environmental Planning Policy, we need to amend that SEP instead of the LEP. However, it's the same process, and we treat the SEP exactly the same as we would treat an LEP amendment. So its current zone is B3 commercial core under the SEP, which isn't changing, and it's got a site area of 1,400 square metres around about. If we move to slide 3, which looks very similar. This talks about the Gosford Cultural Precinct, which is not progressing at this point, and also the regional library, which was part of that cultural precinct, is now happening around the corner on Donaldson Street. The next slide number 4, talks around development controls. And as I said, it's zone B3, which is commercial core, and it's classified as community land. And as I said, this proposal is to reclassify the land to operational land. There are no other proposed changes to any planning controls or anything like that. It's simply a reclassification of the site. And if we move to the final slide, which is a slide we have put together for all of our, which we'll use tonight for all of our planning proposals, rezonings, and items like this. It really, this slide shows where we are in the process. We've been through the pre-lodgement phase of this reclassification. We've had the independent advice of the local planning panel has been put into this process, and now we are at the first point of council consideration, where we decide tonight to either refuse the planning application or refuse the planning proposal, or as per the recommendation, prepare the planning proposal and go through that formal process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milliken. I'd just like the community to note that last slide. It's a slide I hope you'll now see whenever anything is coming to us, to be able to show to you where in the process a particular council paper is aiming to move it on. So we're trying to keep it simple, and I think it was a very good slide that Mr. Milliken has demonstrated. So I have asked him to put that into pretty much every paper that we're talking about, whether it's a planning proposal or whatever, so that the community can see exactly where the step is and what we're actually trying to achieve, and where the community can be involved in consultation or in forms of discussion. So this will, of course, be forming part of our land that we will be hoping to do an MOU with New South Wales Government for the relocation of the TAFE down that end of Man Street. So it is important that we proceed this and get it through so that it can be part and parcel of that MOU down the track. But it's an exciting proposal, I think, from the state government to put a TAFE down there with 3,000 plus students. That foot traffic will undoubtedly help in some of the retail down that part of the world, and that combined with the already education university precinct at the other end of Man Street, we're starting to bookend it, to start to make things look like you're going to get foot traffic going, and if we can get some other development going in there for some of those sites that are already vacant and ready to go, hopefully we can get the kickstart of that. And obviously the stadium master planning and some of the other instruments that we're looking at, all part and parcel of how can we revitalise and get Gosford to be a lot better than it currently is. So with this, I'm happy to support the planning proposal to go forward to the Minister of Planning, and therefore move and accept the recommendations that are shown on the screen and make those as a decision of Council. Now, we've covered item 2.7 at the beginning, so we'll move now to item 2.8, which is a request to prepare a section 3.22 MPNA Act submission for precinct 2A and 2B North Wyong Shire structure plan. And Mr. Milliken, I think you've got another role to play.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Administrator. Yes, so this planning proposal, or this proposal, is a tidying up of a mapping error that occurred when the Department of Planning and Environment gazetted the Wadolba planning proposal a year or so ago, I think it was. And thanks to Steph for coming along and presenting to Council earlier on this morning, earlier on this evening. But I guess the issue that we've got here is it's not an opportunity to re-prosecute arguments as part of the planning proposal. This is a tidying up a planning proposal that has already been gazetted, where the wildlife corridor should have been gazetted at 40 metres wide, but a mapping error as part of that resulted in it being gazetted at 30 metres wide. As part of the development of the original planning proposal, the 40 metre wide reserve was negotiated through that rezoning process, and as a result of the biodiversity requirements for the squirrel glider, the 40 metre width was adopted as the width of that corridor in the planning proposal. So the slide up on the screen shows a slightly different process for fixing errors like this, which are known as Section 3.22 applications. They're to deal with minor amendments, and also so things like if there's a typographical error in the LEP or something that's not quite the way it should be, we can go through this process to tidy it up. We've engaged with the Department of Planning and Environment, and they agree that this is a minor mapping error, that we can go through the 3.22 process to tidy that up. So whilst I appreciate the comments of Steph, the planning consultant, earlier on, unfortunately the planning proposal has been made, and this is a process for tidying up a mapping error. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Milliken. Yes, I have to say, in discussions out there, I was persuaded by that argument, and therefore I'm going to have to move and to proceed with the recommendation that's been put forward by the officers. So with that, I will recommend the recommendations as shown on the screen and make that as a decision of Council. Thank you. So we'll now move to item 2.9, which is a planning proposal for 129 Newling Street, Lisarow. Mr. Milligan again.
Yes, me again.
Extra work.
Thank you. So there's another slide for this one. If you move to the slide, it just shows the planning proposal process. So this is a planning proposal to rezone 121 and 129 Newling Street in Lisarow from B2, which is a local centre, to R1 general residential. And that will be in the Gosford LEP or the Central Coast LEP, whichever is in effect at the time. And hopefully the Central Coast LEP isn't too much further away. The planning proposal was exhibited between November and between 19th of November and 17th of December last year, just before Christmas. No submissions were received as part of that. The proposal has merit as the site, it lacks main road exposure for a commercial development, so the B2 zoning isn't necessarily the most appropriate zoning. And it also, by rezoning to residential, will expand the available housing choice in that Lisarow area that's close to existing infrastructure and services. So the report recommends that we continue with the finalisation of the planning proposal. And if you look on the slide on the screen, you can see that we have gone through the the exhibition proposal. We have considered the submissions of which there were none, and we are at the final consideration of council where we have three options, to refuse, to support or to amend. And the recommendation tonight is to support the planning proposal as presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milliken. As you could see from the slide, we are pretty much right at the end of the process, if you like, of this particular item. It's been through consultation, it's been through all the processes up to now. We're basically into the final stage, which I'm comfortable to endorse. So I will pass the recommendations that are shown on the screen and make those as a decision of council. Item 2.10, which Mr. Lawler spoke to. I think we can help Mr. Lawler out, Mr. Milliken, can't we?
Yes, we can, Mr. Administrator, and thank you to Mr. Lawler for coming along tonight. Of course, sometimes planning proposals, as they progress, other things happen in the background, and in this case, Mr. Lawler came along and made us aware of a development that was happening in the background, not directly related, but will have an impact on the planning proposal. So we're going to propose a minor tweak to the recommendation just to address Mr. Lawler's submissions. So again, there's a slide for tonight, which should show where we are in the planning proposal process, and we're at the same point as where we were with the last item. We're at a decision point where we can refuse, amend, or support the planning proposal. So this one consists of 49 lots, generally in Glenworth Valley and Calga. The current zoning is C2 environmental conservation and also RU2 rural landscape, and it's zoned under the Gosford LEP. We're not changing the land use zones, we're just proposing to add an additional permitted use, or known as APUs, on certain areas of the site. So the Glenworth Valley Outdoor Adventures part of the slide. The APUs, or additional permitted uses, are generally located within areas of the site which have been cleared, so they're not going to impact the environmental value of the land, and they also enable that economic development of tourist-related uses that occur on the site. So we're looking at 8 additional permitted uses, which are outdoor recreation facilities, eco-tourist facilities, camping grounds, tourist and visitor accommodation, extensive agriculture, function centre, entertainment facility, and food and drink premises. So the planning proposal means that those particular uses will become permitted uses on these sites only. That's why they're known as additional permitted uses. So it's a slight difference from the LEP generally. We're adding uses to this site that can be permitted. We exhibited the planning proposal between November 22nd and 20th of December last year, with only 2 public submissions received. And the planning proposal is considered to have strategic merit. It continues the uses of the site that exist in there, while still protecting the environmental and conservation values of the land. And it's recommended that we proceed to support the amendment with the minor change to the resolution tonight. And we'll amend again either the Gosford LEP or, fingers crossed, the Central Coast LEP when that gets gazetted, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Thank you. So we have the new recommendation on the screen. I think, yep, right, there we go. So look, certainly thanks to Mr. Lawler for pointing out a small change that needed to be made. But again, as you can see by that flow chart, you can see that we're pretty much right at the end of the process. It's a lovely part of the world, I've got to say. I've driven through that 2 or 3 times in recent times, and going up to see communities and so on. And yeah, it's just a fantastic part of the world, and I can fully see why it's got great tourism potential and so on. It really does. It's a beautiful part. So with that change and just that small amendment, I am now going to move the recommendations that are shown on the screen and make those as a decision of council. So we now come to item 2.11, which is the community outcomes following the community consultation for the Central Coast Stadium, rezoning and reclassifications, or part thereof. Ms. Cowley.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Right, if we go to the next slide, thank you. The purpose of this report is to report on the submissions and outcomes following the public exhibition of the Central Coast Stadium. And as you can see on the next slide, there are 2 lots associated with the stadium. We've got lot 1, and the proposal is to modify the plan of management for lot 1 to reflect the uses triggered by any master plan proposal. And lot 2, that is shown in this image, we are seeking to commence the rezoning and the reclassification process for that lot. When we go to the next slide, you can see that we are in stage 1, which is in the pre-lodgement stage, and following on to that, we would see the same flow chart that was shown in Mr. Milliken's presentation, and so you can see that we are right at the beginning of this process, which is the pre-lodgement process. Going over to the next slide, the key findings from the community submissions included consideration of user groups who may be affected, stadium management rights that could be provided to another party, support for the rezoning and the reclassification process to stimulate the stadium, a request for more music concerts being held at the stadium. Specifically, when the support versus the unsupported is compared for the proposed stadium rezoning, a ratio of 62 to 38 is determined in favour of the proposal. And that's the recommendation that we have put to Council. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Ms. Cowley. As I mentioned earlier, this is all part and parcel of, I think, a greater vision for what we can do with Gosford. Clearly, we have a very nice park there, which is between the waterfront and Man Street, and we have a motorway that goes, if you like, a motorway and large roundabout that cuts the foreshore off. So we have to do this in stages. Part of the stages to now look was to look at the stadium area and the other area, lot 2, which includes the bowling club currently there, and look at that. How can we turn all this into something that really helps drive the future economy in Gosford? So in this particular proposal, as Ms. Cowley showed through that flow chart, we are right at the beginning of the process, particularly for these 2 lots. One, because of the complications of going through rezoning and reclassification, we're actually just looking at a change to the management side of it. The other one is currently leased from us by the Leagues Club, who sublease it to the bowling club. So we need to deal with, particularly with the Leagues Club, and I guess they need to deal with the bowling club. But nonetheless, I'm going to ask the staff, when they're talking and going through this, I'm going to ask them to talk to the bowling club to make sure that they are included in the discussions so that they're not left out, because they are an important group of people and they should have a say. So I am specifically asking the staff to include them in the future discussions. But it is an exciting part of the world. We have just let the stadium rights to somebody who hopefully will actually be able to increase the participation and the use of the stadium. So part of this is already underway, but it will give them greater flexibility and what they can do if some of this other stuff actually comes to fruition. So as, if you like, one of the first cabs off the rank in this whole part of re-looking at Gosford and the waterfront, I'm very happy to pass and move the recommendations that are shown on the screen here and make those as a decision of Council. Item 2.12, which is the Surf Lifesaving Central Coast Surf Club Financial Partnership. It's always nice to be able to work with a group of people who do a hugely professional job and work extremely well together. And I was really, really pleased to hear John's comments today about how well we work together. In one of my previous roles, I had two which were in the city, which didn't have surf clubs, but at Warringah, of course, we did have a number of surf clubs. And again, it was a delight to be able to do the same model, which is the council looking after the Monday to Friday on the beaches and the volunteers looking after in the weekends. And that way you can share resources and you share personnel and you share knowledge. So I was really delighted to hear how well we have been working together. So Mr. Bell, you can take some credit for your last month and finding them some money. And I know it's a little bit awkward. We can't necessarily plan way out into the future because we are somewhat subject to what IPART's going to determine with our SRV. But nonetheless, certainly, if we get the SRV, then the surf club up here will be able to look forward to continued support from the council. So delighted to see that we've made some progress there, delighted to see that we can actually hand over some useful assets to them and also help them with some of their servicing of some of their current equipment. So with that, I'm going to move the recommendations, it's shown on the screen, and pass those as a decision of council. Item 2.13, which is the outcomes of the public exhibition of the draft responsible dog ownership policy. Now, this policy has been out on consultation and we received approximately 124 submissions, and not surprisingly, the majority of those submissions are around compliance and behaviour of dogs. There's another closely associated policy which we're in the process of developing, which is the Dogs in Open Space strategy that will inform more directly the decision making and also will encourage the safe and sustainable dog participation in council's open spaces. I expect that paper will contain some more interesting information and no doubt some debate within the community. But that paper will be presented to council sometime later in 2022. We are picking up one of the suggestions that came through, which is conducting a signage audit and looking to put more signage in so that people are aware of what their responsibilities are. And we're also scheduling pop-up stores where there will be staff talking to members of the community who own dogs about things they can do to improve dog behaviour and dog health, and also talking about cats as well. So it's not revolutionary in that sense, it's tweaking the previous or current policy. As I said, the Dogs in Open Space strategy will consist of more detail, but for the time being, we've made some minor changes through their wording changes, added some bits here and there and so on to reflect some of the comments we had. We have made those and are making some changes in the signage area, but by and large, we have to recall from the resource point of view, we don't have any more resources. It's going to be hard to actually do a lot more in the compliance area. Of course, we can respond as fast as we can to complaints from the public, but it is a difficult area. There are a lot of dogs in this part of the world, and it is something, as soon as we can get some more money, I'd certainly be encouraging the council and the staff to actually look at can we do a little bit more. But as I say, we'll wait to see what comes back for the Dogs in Open Space strategy. But for the time being, I wish to note that this has been on and out for exhibition. We've encompassed a number of the comments, and that it's asking me to adopt the policy as per that amended attachment that's attached in the attachments. So with that, I'm going to move the recommendation as shown on the screen and make those as a decision of council. Item 2.14 is, if you like, a bit of a machinery of government change, is to remove the historic care, control and management responsibility of Transport New South Wales land at Lot 9 DP something or other, Pacific Highway Mooney. And it's something that should have been done at the original time, but for some reason, the Governor-General proclaimed that the council would have care and control of it. So unfortunately, we have to reverse that process and we have to go back through the Governor to actually change that care and control back to the state government to take the liability, if you like, off our hands. Now, the state government agrees that that's the process to go forward, and I believe that they're actually comfortable with that approach. So I shall actually move the recommendations to endorse the removal for that land and to authorise the CEO to write to the Governor requesting that proclamation of 31st July 1953 be revoked. So with that, I'm going to move the recommendation as shown on the screen and pass that as a decision of Council. Item 2.15 is to note that I and the CEO will be attending the Local Government Association Conference, ALGA, which is the National General Assembly in Canberra, I think it's in late June, and we will be attending that. I am a voting member and I will be voting on resolutions that our councils are putting forward. This council is not putting forward any resolutions for that particular meeting. I will leave that to an elected body to do down the track. So with that, I will move the recommendation as shown on the screen. Now, item 2.16 is tree vandalism, the statistics report. Now, I do have a question going through that, and I have heard something on the, I think on the radio, that we only achieve approximately 2% win, if you like, in our prosecutions, which does seem like quite a low figure, I must admit. So I'm going to ask Mr. Milliken, actually, if he could just quietly explain what the issues are when it comes to us trying to make a prosecution and why it is so difficult to actually achieve a prosecution. I note we do issue a large number of warnings and so on, but in terms of prosecutions, it's at 2%. So Mr. Milliken, could you please try and explain why it is very difficult for us to actually obtain prosecutions in this area?
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I think the short answer is that people who want to vandalise trees don't want to get caught. So they do them in the middle of the night. They do them when it's hard for us or the community to find evidence or record evidence of the actual vandalism happening. And that's why it's so challenging to get successful prosecutions in this space, because of course you have to clear the burden of evidence and be able to demonstrate that the offence has occurred. That's why it is so challenging, and more often than not, these activities occur at night or on parks where it is hard to see what's happening, and even harder to get photographic or video evidence of what is going on. But that being said, out of the 500 investigations, a nice round number, 500 exactly, investigations into illegal tree works that council did last year, 63 of them resulted in a formal caution. So out of the low number of actual successful prosecutions, we got around 5 to 6 times that amount in formal cautions, which means that whilst we may not have had enough evidence to catch them on this occasion, by issuing a caution, we're letting the alleged offender know that we're onto them, and we know what is going on. So more often than not, that's just because we haven't had that sufficient evidence. So there was out of that 500, 195. We said we didn't have sufficient evidence to proceed to either a formal caution or a prosecution. So that's around 200 out of 500. So about 40% fall into that category, and about another 40%, just over 40%, we were found out that they were exempt as a result of the complaint coming in, or they'd already had an approval in place. So that explains around 40% of it. But yeah, yes, it is very challenging to get formal prosecutions in this space, but we do have formal cautions as an effective mechanism as well to try and improve compliance in the tree space. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Milligan. It's just interesting when you look at the out of 500 investigations, there was already prior approval for 219. Then if you look at, as you say, successful prosecutions and the formal cautions, we have something like 73. So we've actually got, getting close to 20% where we're actually, taking some action against people who are doing this illegally. But as you say, because it's illegal, people do it when they don't want to get caught. And it is a difficult thing to chase. So all in all, I suspect it's not a bad result. I note that you're also asking that you want to report on it yearly as opposed to 6 monthly. I would agree with that. I can't see the need for that sort of number to report on a 6 monthly basis. I'm happy to support the yearly report as well as. So with that, I shall note the report and move those recommendations that are shown on the screen. So that concludes the part of the ordinary council meeting. We now have one item which I mentioned, which is the confidential item. Now, as I said, the paper can't be made public and I can't talk about it totally, but what I can say, the resolutions that have been made are shown on the screen. I know, it's been changed, not changed anyway. And what this is actually about is that we have a balloon payment to make on one of our borrowings. And the balloon payment is in actual fact $12 million that we have to make on one of our borrowings. Now, because of our strong cash flow, the sewer, the unrestricted component of the sewer funds is available, and we've been able to find $7 million of that to be able to pay off, if you like, some of that loan. But it still leaves us $5 million, which we have to borrow. So that $5 million will be funded by a loan, but bear in mind we're repaying 7, but we're borrowing 5. Our total debt, when we take the 7 million off, actually comes back down to 326.7. So our total debt now stands at $326.7 million. And I know, Marilyn, you'll be very interested in that number. I just want to putting all of that in context. By borrowing that, taking that $150 million of emergency loans, we have paid all the staff costs out. We have repaid the monies owing to the internal and externally restricted reserves. We have paid down our debt a little bit to where it is now only a total of $326.7 million. And we have the 100 million we had in the unrestricted cash. That has to offset the other debt in sewer and water restricted reserves of about 45 million. So we have, if you like, unrestricted cash now of about 60 odd million and a total bank debt of 326.7 million. Compare that to years ago when we had a total debt, including the unlawfully used funds, of 565. So as the CEO mentioned earlier, it is a massive turnaround, and you can see the financial results there now for all to see. And we hope the trading position as we move forward over the next 10 years we will eliminate another $150 million of those emergency loans. They will be repaid over the next 10 years. That's the intention. But that will only occur if we get that SRV to come through. If not, as I've said earlier, we will have to look at some cuts to be able to ensure that that bottom line is maintained to be able to repay those debts. So at the moment, subject to IPART's final determination, things are looking pretty good. The business recovery plan has comprehensively worked, and those are the numbers that we've got as of at the end of February this year. With that, I will move those recommendations that are shown on the screen and make those a decision of council. With that, it draws the meeting to a close, so I will close the meeting at 7:50 p.m. and thank you all for your attendance.